Hello! So today we're going to start working on a project that I hadn't anticipated on having to work on quite yet. So I was working on this dress right over here, and I tried it on again for a fitting, and I broke my stays. You might be asking, how does one break some stays? You break some stays by making a silly mistake like I did. So these are my little short stays. And I was like, oh, I have all this pink ribbon. It'd be super cute if I did my drawstring in the front with pink ribbon too. Not thinking about the fact that ribbon frays really easily under stress, like where it's stitched. So of course I was doing my fitting for this dress and I went to tighten my bust in. Whoop! The other half of my cord completely came out. So I just have the ribbon cord on one side. And theoretically, I could go in and unstitch the top binding and just re-put in a binding cord or drawstring cord. But unfortunately, these stays have just never quite been as comfortable as I would have wanted them to be. Like, I edited the busk gores, so the busk gores are really good. That fits really well. But the length, they're short stays, so they're supposed to be kind of like, you know, like the sports bra of corsets. But these are too short. They dig in at like a really uncomfortable point, like right where I start to get like a tiny bit of a belly, and they dig in right there, and it's not the most comfortable. It's fine for when I'm working on projects and like taking photos of them, wearing them short term. But if I was gonna have to wear these out for like an event or a convention or like anything, I would not be having a good time. So it's been on my list to make another pair of stays and either make a long pair of stays or another pair of short stays that's just like 2 inches longer. So I guess this is putting the fire under me to finally make longer short stays, because I really don't feel like doing long stays right now. I had tried to make long stays before. It was not a fun time. So we'll remake those, make them a little bit longer, not do a ribbon drawstring. The only problem I'm having right now is I tried to find my red threaded pattern and I have yet to be able to find it. So I did find my bust gusset because I changed this from the original red thread pattern. It was really the only thing I changed when I ended up making this, was making the bust gusset bigger. So at least I found that, but I have yet to actually find my actual pattern. So I'm gonna try looking around for that more. It's not in my basket of patterns. So I might also check Red Threaded's website and see if they had like a digital download version of the file. I don't remember, because then at least I can print it out and get started working on this right away. Good news, they do have PDF patterns in their Etsy shop, so I'll have to go there. But I did want to show you that the ones that the pattern I had is this one, this Regency short stays.
With the pattern printed out, it's time to make alterations. In this case, all I'm going to do is lengthen each of the 3 stay pieces by 2 inches. That complete, I can cut my pattern pieces out from my cotton sateen.
Alrighty, so I sat down and I figured out an embroidery pattern for my stays. I've seen a lot of this sort of viney floral design and a lot of, especially like late 1820s, early 1830s stays, which are usually long stays. But I decided to take the same sort of inspiration for my short stays just to make them extra pretty. I went ahead and we did this one floral design on the back of, the center back of the stays. And then I did the same kind of floral for the cups of the stays. I don't know how well this is actually going to show up. I've seen a lot of stays with floral designs on the cups, but we will see how it shows up. And then for the center front, I'm going to do some cording underneath the bust to help support it, and then the line of the vines. And then I've already got my bust cut down. Derek actually did that for me the other day. But I still have to go ahead and like sand it and try to curve the edges a little bit. It's not going to be as pretty as this edge, but hopefully I can get it a little bit nicer. And that'll go right around there. So I've already got all of my fabric pieces cut out too. And then now I just need to decide if I want to go for a pink embroidery or white. My heart says pink because why not? But also the white would probably be also nice and pretty and simple. I think what I'm gonna do is I think I'm going to start out by doing one of the cups in the pink. So that way it's like a smaller piece, it's easy to cut out again if I need to because it doesn't take up too much space. And if I don't like the pink, I can always switch to the white. But we'll see how the pink does. I kind of wish I had a lighter pink in my stash, but I also don't want to go out and buy pink embroidery thread right now. So I might as well just use what I have in my stash, especially because I have 2 of those. And I have a bunch of white, so we're gonna go ahead and give that a shot and see where it takes us. Alright, so I went ahead and I tested out the embroidery for the busk gores. This side is the one that's embroidered. This is just with my friction pen showing the design. I really like this pink. I actually completely forgot when I was going through my embroidery thread that I got this pink silk thread from Gutermann a while back, and it's actually the perfect pink for what I was wanting. So I've just doubled this up and I've done a back stitch to do the stitches. And then because I was using friction pen, I went ahead and I did white thread to do the outline on the cups, and I stitched the outline on this side. But luckily this didn't take too long, so wish me luck.
Okay, first things first is to draw the rest of my embroidery patterns onto the fabric, and then I can get started with the stitching. So because I'm using friction pen, my markings disappear when I iron my fabric, which is a nifty little trick.
Alright, so I have gone ahead and I have finished all of the embroidery for the stays, and I'm super excited with how it's turned out. I love it. Okay, so now that I have finished the embroidery, it is time to break out the coutil. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch my pieces down onto the coutil. So, in case you don't know, coutil is just this very tightly woven fabric that is usually used in corsetry. Stays of this Regency era would probably have just used some really stiff linen or cotton canvas, but I have a bunch of this coutil on hand, so that is what I'm going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatline these pieces, or I'm going to treat them as if they're going to be the same. So I'm going to have a layer of my cotton sateen and a layer of the stiffer coutil, and I am going to treat them like they're this exact same piece, like one piece of fabric, when I stitch this whole thing together, because the coutil is going to reinforce this super flimsy lightweight sateen, but the sateen is going to have the nice sheen and is a little bit more of a historically accurate fabric. Alright, so let's get to it.
So once I have my coutil all cut out and basted down to my sateen, I can move on to finishing each separate piece. This center front piece gets rows of cording sewn down on either side of my embroidery. This has to be done after I have the 2 pieces together, because otherwise the cording wouldn't have a channel in which to fit through. I honestly sewed my cording channels a little too narrow, which is why you can see me struggling a lot to get my cording through. Cording done, I move on to sewing a channel for my busk, and the trend of me sewing things too small continues. Last for the front piece is sewing in the bust gussets, which first off involves me thread stitching the bust gusset itself as well as its opening. This opening gets slashed open and then pressed to the side, so that way we can top stitch the bust gussets into place.
Alrighty, so I finished up doing all the bust gaskets on the front, and I have to say they look super cute. I'm really excited. I was a little worried about the embroidery. I was like, oh, I don't know if it's gonna look good all together or if it's gonna look just too much or too messy, but so far I'm really happy with it. So the bust gussets are a little too tall for the opening, but that is okay. I actually double checked with the red threaded instructions, and they do say to expect the bust gussets to be a little bit too large and that you'll probably have to trim them down. But next what we're gonna do is work on the side seam pieces. So we're gonna do some piping like I did here, but with a larger yarn on the side seams to use that instead of boning. And this is going to do two things. One, I do not have enough of my imitation whalebone boning in order to do all of the corset. So what we're going to do is we're going to do mostly just the cording, which actually is probably slightly more historically accurate. The cording was definitely used a lot more than boning was at this era for support and structure. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I already did the one side with some cording just to test it out and see what I wanted. This will probably feel very comfortable and very lightweight once I'm done with it. So we're going to go ahead and get started marking the other side piece and stitch it up. So let's get going.
Sides done, we're going to move on to the back, where we're going to mark down some channels for some more cording. We're going to do this instead of boning, which actually wasn't uncommon and, well, pretty common for this time period. So in order to do this, we're going to mark 2 rows of cording and then the eyelets and then 2 more rows of cording. And then we're going to fold it over before we stitch it all down. Channels prepped, we're going to move on to marking our eyelet holes and then poking them through with an awl. In order to stitch these down, we are going to do so with what is called a buttonhole or a blanket stitch, which involves us making a little loop with the thread and then catching it with the needle as we go in and out of the fabric. I reach for my awl often while I'm sewing eyelet holes because it helps keep the holes round and open as I'm working them.
So I am back and I have finished prepping all of the different separate pieces. So now that we've done that, it is time to actually start putting everything together so it's all one piece. So for the most part so far I have been following red threaded instructions that come with the short stays, as well as pulling references from this all hefty book, which is one of my favorites, which is The Lady's Stratagem. So it's The Lady's Stratagem, a repository of 1820s directions for the toilette, mantua making, stay making, millinery, and etiquette. Highly recommend this if you're interested in like Regency, 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. It's got some really good instructions for sewing and beauty and all of that stuff from the era. So they have a whole section on stay making, and the example stays they use have a little bit different of a pattern than these. They're actually just 2 pieces, a front and a back, and then some gores. So their instructions are a little bit different, so that's why I've been using red threaded a lot, especially because red threaded, I mean, they know what they're doing. This is what they do. But for figuring out how to do some hand sewing, Lady's Stratagem has been really helpful. It also has some great little pieces of advice for sewing stays. One thing it recommends doing in here is taking some thin leather and placing it at the top and bottom on the inside of your busk pocket to help prevent rubbing and the stays breaking through the fabric. It talks about the kind of materials to use, all sorts of really different, interesting historical tidbits, because these are actual writings from the era. You also get to listen to some, 1820s lecturing on how you can't wear your stays too tight, you can't do this with your stays because it's gonna malform your body and it's evil. So that mindset dates back to even now. I mean, nothing new. But I am rambling at this point. So basically what we're gonna do and what this book recommends is we are going to go ahead and we are going to prep our seam. So in order to do that, I am going to mark, I believe it is 5/8 seam allowance on the red threaded. So we are going to go ahead and draw our lines, our 5/8 inch lines. And then what we are going to do is we are going to press some of the seams back and leave the others flat. This is a side seam. For example, I will press, the cat's screaming at me. I will press back a seam allowance and then put it on top of a flat seam allowance that is unpressed, and then we will stitch it down from the front, which we would consider top stitching now. So that is what we're gonna do. My battery is losing charge. My battery is dying. My battery is dying. So that is my sign to stop talking and actually get to work. So let's go.
Here you can see which seams I've decided to fold over and which ones I've decided to keep flat. I start by lining my folded edge up with my seam line and then pinning it in place. Once I have the pieces pinned in place, I'll go ahead and top stitch them together and then repeat for all the remaining seams. It was at this point I realized I forgot to mark and sew the eyelets that attach these shoulder straps. So we're going to go ahead and get those all marked and sewn before it's time to move on to doing the binding. I think you can also see here a little bit more clearly what I was talking about earlier when I was trying to describe the buttonhole stitch. Also on the agenda, but completely optional, is finishing the inside seams of the stays. In order to do this, I'm going to trim one side of the seam allowance and then fold the other side over and then just give it a quick whip stitch in order to secure it to the inside. For the busk gores, I'm going to do this little zigzag looking stitch that's called a herringbone stitch, and this will help secure down the seams of the busk gores so that way they don't flip-flop around. Last thing before I move on to the binding, I'm going to secure these little grosgrain ribbons I got from my drawstring into the seam allowance to help secure it a little bit more and then stitch it down real good. For binding, I'm using this cotton twill tape that just gets folded in half and then top stitched down, making sure once you reach the drawstring not to catch it. And before I finished sewing the center front together, I was supposed to insert my busk, but this is where everything kind of fell apart. I realized that I sewed the channel a little too tight and that it was also too sheer. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little pocket that I'm going to stitch on the backside of the stays. This was sort of a last minute ditch effort to try and get these done as soon as possible, but hey, it works. So I made this little pocket, slipped the busk through, and then I stitched it closed at the top and bottom, and then whip stitched it down along the lines of that I had originally sewn for the busk. Busk crisis at least temporarily averted, it's time to finish sewing down that binding. And at the center front, I'm supposed to leave an opening for the drawstring to pass through, but it's a little uneven now and off-center because I accidentally frayed the twill tape and it made it shorter. So we just finished stitching that down, and then we have a little working drawstring over the busk gussets. And with that, we repeat it on the other side and we're done.
Okay, so we are all done. And overall, I am really happy with how this has turned out. I think the embroidery is perfect. It's just like the perfect little touch of floral, and I think it looks amazing on the stays. Few notes. Now that I have tried this on, now that it's done. The front's fine. Still a little uncomfortable at the bottom of the busk, but I have a feeling that unless I make long stays, that's just going to be a little bit of a problem. And I can tell you right now, it's more comfortable than my short stays were. So I think honestly the solution is just going to be to put a tiny bit of batting behind the busk, because that's really where it digs in. And when I had the boning on my last pair dug in, it's just that little bottom bit of the busk. So it'll also force it back up here and out more at the bottom. So that, and then the back, I have a little bit of wrinkling, which honestly I should have expected. I definitely have hips, so I should have figured that it would wrinkle a little bit. It's just that bottom. So I'm honestly wondering, I might go back, either replace the cording I used with some boning to help keep it stiff, or just take the stays and angle them up to right about, it's really just that last eyelet. So I think if I start in the front and then angle it up in the back so it goes over where that last eyelet is, I think that'll also solve that problem pretty easy, and then I can just rebind the bottom edge. And then of course the busk placket. It's okay how it is now, but what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and find some like 2-inch wide linen tape. I think Burnley and Trowbridge has some. I need to check that. But that is what the Ladies Stratagem recommends using for a busk placket. So I think that's what I'm gonna do here, is just take out the quick little pocket I made and stitch down a piece of linen tape. But you know, for now, this is really good and I'm really happy. Few minor tweaks and it'll be really good to go. But as it is right now, it's super usable, which is great because that means I can actually get started working and finishing all of the other Regency projects that I want to do, because I can't really work on them if I don't have undergarments. Wow. Alright, so thank you for joining me on this little sewing adventure. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe, and if you'd give this video a like, I'd appreciate it a lot. Alright, thank you.